Member for Borkham Hills and Minister for Police and Emergency Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's one of those occasions, I think, for parliaments right across the Commonwealth to reflect on the history, sacrifice and service that makes up this great institution with the passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. For us as parliamentarians, we look on His Royal Highness as the consort to our sovereign and to an institution that has given Western democracies 1,000 years of stable service. But I think it's also important for us to acknowledge and pause and reflect on the fact that he was, like most of us, he was a parent, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a grandfather, and of course, he was a great-grandfather. Mr. Speaker, he was all of those, but for me, he was also a bit of a hero. Not just because he was the consort to the greatest monarch the world has ever seen, but because he was a veteran of the Second World War in the Royal Navy, a veteran who took up arms against what I considered to be the most evil regime the world has ever seen in the face face of adversity, and of course he could have quite easily used his rank as a member of a European royal family to avoid active military service. In fact, he probably could have avoided any military service by virtue of his rank, but he didn't. He saw the evils in fascism. He saw his obligations, his noblesse oblige, and took up arms against the Third Reich and the Axis powers, saw active service, and in that act, in my mind, made him a hero of the Western world. He's been called Prince Philip, amongst other things, and by his critics other critics of the Westminster system, he has been criticised, but for various comments and actions that he's made over the course of his life, and I think that's what makes up the charm of the story of His Royal Highness. But I don't think anybody, given his military service, could say he was anything but courageous, and I don't think anybody in the world could say he had nothing but loyalty to the Commonwealth, whether that be through his patronage of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, which both my wife and children, both my sons as well as Nicole, have completed the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which has now obviously fallen to the patronage of his son, the Prince Edward. But he also, of course, was the patron of the English-speaking Union, and in that vein worked very, very hard to ensure that the English-speaking nations of the world not only reinforced or indeed encouraged Westminster traditions, but of course they encouraged those nations to continue loyalty to the rule of law and of course the fight for freedom, the eternal fight for freedom. I alongside my wife, met him just the once. It was a garden party here in Sydney. He was here with the Queen, and I was there as a returned peacekeeper. And he saw, of course, the decorations that peacekeepers are offered in his wife's name, and I could quite easily identified exactly what it was, the Australian Service Medal, which, when you consider how many garden parties and military establishments Prince Philip has visited, it was quite impressive that he knew what the Australian Service Medal looked like. And we had a brief discussion about peacekeeping operations in the Pacific Rim. He made some remarks about how unstable some of our neighbouring islands are, and I thought that at the end of the conversation he'd certainly given me the impression that he had a genuine interest in the Australian Defence Force, which indeed he did. Yes, he was politically incorrect, which is probably one of the things that I admire about him. But he was also a great believer in constitutional monarchy. As I've mentioned before, he was an advocate of the rule of law. But I think what we should reflect on the most in the life of Prince Philip is the fact that he genuinely believed, and I think that was personified through the Duke of Edinburgh Award, he genuinely believed that we had an obligation in this world to leave our children a better world than what we inherited. And I think that he did that, not only in his family, but I think that he did that right around the Commonwealth. I suppose one of the faults of history is the fact that Prince Philip was actually born a Prince of Greece and Denmark, not a Prince of the United Kingdom. His family villa was in Monrepos on the island of Corfu, and he was born on the 10th of June, which of course here in Australia is the 11th of June, which is my birthday. So we always were able to acknowledge the fact that his birthday was the day before when I was a child, and celebrated both very, very important stages in the calendar. But Mr. Speaker, he married, of course, as we've heard from the previous members, Princess Elizabeth on the 20th of November in 1947 at Westminster Abbey. They had been introduced as a number of years beforehand, particularly in the early years of the war, as Prince Philip was preparing to be deployed with the Royal Navy. He, in 2009, became Britain's longest-serving consort, which is no mean feat indeed. Monarchy. Millies, Valiant and Wallace. Service. Bay rendered on part of the crew on the HMAS as first lieutenant, helped recover prisoners. I would have thought the trauma of the operations during the Second World War on the high seas weren't difficult enough, that recovering your fellow countrymen who had been prisoners of war would have certainly tested the will and character of any individual. One of the last surviving people in the country he's one of the last surviving people in the country to have served in the Second World War at Cape Matapan, where he was mentioned in dispatches for bravery. No, not an insignificant accolade in military circles. During the invasion of Sicily, where he saved his ship by his quick thinking, and from that conflict he took an ethic of service that he applied throughout his unprecedented changes of the post-war era, particularly in the United Kingdom. Something that is often overlooked, although those who sat and binged The Crown in recent times would know that he was also a qualified pilot. Much like his grandson, the Prince William, Prince Philip flew 5,986 hours in 59 types of aircraft. Now, I don't think I could even work out how to drive 59 types of cars, Mr. Speaker, so the fact that this man could get into 59 various variations of an aircraft and know how to fly it is quite remarkable. Mr. Speaker, Prince Philip made more than 20 visits to Australia, which was in fact more than any other royal, and he was first as a Navy officer during the Second World War, but perhaps most notably in 1956 when he opened the Melbourne Olympic Games. His impact was profound, not least on the more than 775,000 young Australians who participated in the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award since it became here in 1959, and the Duke of Edinburgh Award now is so successful it's offered up in more than 130 countries. Mr. Speaker, service beginning with his time in the Royal Navy, including during that time during the Second World War, means that he will probably be the last active serviceman to be a member of, to be a monarch or a consort. But as patron to more than 50 organisations, including the Australian Conservation Foundation, which I know the Minister of the Environment is quite chuffed about. He was patron of Surf Lifesaving Australia. He was patron of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and given his own service, he has a strong remained up until his death with a strong connection to the Australian Defence Force. Mr. Speaker, he retired, of course, from public life in August 2017, and I remember the day that was announced vividly. We were in this Parliament, and I don't think that anybody begrudged a man at his age from taking retirement at 96 years old after completing no fewer than 22,219 royal engagements across the Commonwealth. Mr. Speaker, it is sad, but it is a time of sadness and mourning for not only our monarch but also the royal family. However, I think that as members of the Commonwealth of Nations who have seen his service explicitly and generously offered up, it is important for this Parliament to say valet to a great leader and note that the world has changed in his passing.
Well, I thank the member for Borker Mills and our call.